Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Driving at Home podcast. This is your host, Johnny Trokey, and this is the podcast where we talk about Chris's latest sermons and give you some practical action steps and some bonus takeaways from those lessons, all in an effort to help drive them home for you and your family so they show up in your everyday life. Thanks for tuning in to another episode. Let's get started. Welcome back, everybody. Today we are talking about Jesus healing the blind man in John chapter 9. Chris did a really fantastic job presenting this lesson on Sunday, and some of my takeaways just from his lesson alone were this concept that Jesus gave the blind man something to go do. Like, he worked a miracle. He spat in the mud and he rubbed the mud on the guy's eyelids and told him to go wash in the pool of Siloam. And so he went back and washed and came back seeing. So Chris's point in that was that obedience begets miracles. Like, a lot of times, miracles come from simply obeying the word of Jesus. And I love that, because a lot of times we want to see a miracle done in our lives, but we don't want to go and do what Jesus has actually instructed us to do. And this is a great example, a great story about how, when like, obedience should also come with miracles. That you cannot just expect a miracle to happen and not have any responsibility on your shoulders. Like, Jesus has expectations of us. And so it wasn't the miracle didn't happen because this guy went and, washed in the pool of Siloam. There's nothing magical about the pool of Siloam. Why this miracle happened is by the power and grace of Jesus and the faith that this man had in the power of Jesus and the words of Jesus, that he went and obeyed. So it was that together where Jesus didn't need this guy to obey in order to work the miracle, right? But Jesus needed, this guy needed to obey the word of Jesus in order for the miracle to happen. And so there's this really beautiful unity and harmony of obedience mixed with faith, mixed with God's working in his life to produce the ability to see things in a way that he had never been able to before because he was blind. And so the obvious lesson for us is that we too are blind, and it's only when we encounter Jesus and we obey Jesus that he miraculously gives us the power of sight, because we were spiritually blind, but through Jesus we have sight. So that's like the big takeaway anytime, there's blindness involved. And that's why we sing, I once was blind, but now I see. That's why that song has been around so long, because it's just true that we were blind and now we can see. And the takeaway that I want to share with you, sort of this bonus for you, comes from the words of Jesus in John chapter 9, verse 5. It comes at the end of his response to the disciples asking him, like, why is this guy blind? Was it because he sinned, or was it because his parents sinned? And so take in mind that this man had been blind from birth. So it couldn't have been because of his sin if it was a result of sin at all, right? So, because you can't sin when you're a baby. But they're asking Jesus this question, and they want to know, hey, who's to blame for this evil that we see in the world, this thing that isn't right? That's what I mean by evil, is that this thing that is not right. Why is there this thing that is not right in the world? It must have been because he sinned or his parents. So that's really the question that the disciples are asking. But Jesus, he responds by saying, okay, it wasn't because of sin that this man is blind. It's so that the works of God might be displayed in him. And so that really does answer a lot of these questions that people have of why are there things that are wrong in this world? Why do people experience pain and suffering and trials and tribulations? Well, it's so that the works of God might be displayed. That's why. Because it's not about you. It's about the Lord, and it's about glorifying him. Chris had a line in his sermon that God is not in the happiness game. He's in the eternity game. He's about what matters for eternity, and what matters for eternity is not your happiness or your lack of suffering. What matters for eternity is his works being displayed and him being glorified. That's what matters most. And so he answers first there, but then he keeps going, and by the end of his response, he says, as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Well, light is what allows us to see. And when you shed light on something that was once gray or dark, you see it differently than the way that you saw it before. And in that sense, Jesus is the thing that sheds light on everything that we encounter in our lives. He changes our perspective completely. He changes the way we see the world, the way we interact in the world. He says, I am the light of the world. And so for those of us who will place our faith in him, if we will walk in faith and we will walk in obedience, it really is a miracle the degree to which our view of the world changes, the way our thinking changes, the way our behavior changes. And it's because we have a different source of light that is guiding us through our life. We have a different source of power that is working within us, where now he's living in us and guiding us and lighting the path. And so just as this man was once blind, when he encountered Jesus, he was able to see, and he saw things differently than he ever had before. In the same way, we were spiritually blind. And when we encounter Jesus and place our faith in him and we obey him, we're given sight as well. We see things differently than we ever could have before, because now we're looking through the lens of Jesus. We're viewing the world with Jesus's light illuminating the things that we're experiencing. And that changes everything. And it really is a miracle. So that's sort of my takeaway from this encounter that Jesus has. There's so many directions you could go, but for me, when you encounter Jesus, everything changes. The way you see things change, because he is the light of the world. And when you encounter the light, it changes the way you see things. So that wraps this episode of the Driving It Home podcast. We will see you next week. Thanks so much for joining us. If you like this episode, feel free to share it with your friends or tell other church members about it. Try to get the word out as best you can so it could be a blessing to as many people as possible. Thanks again for jumping in. We'll see you next week here on the Driving It Home podcast.